We've had writing for 5,000 years. For the first few hundred, nobody wrote a single story. Not a poem. Not a prayer. Not one king bragging about a war. So what were they writing? Receipts. Piles and piles of receipts. Of everything we've dug up from back then, something like 85% is bookkeeping. Barley in, barley out. Who owes what to who? The oldest writing on Earth is basically a warehouse inventory. And how it ended up that way is a much weirder story than someone sitting down and inventing an alphabet. There's also a name buried in all that paperwork. It might be the oldest name of any human being anywhere. We'll get to him, or her, or it. To see how this happened, go to southern Iraq about 5,000 years ago to a place called Uruk. At the time, it was the biggest city in the world. Maybe 50,000 people inside the walls. Another 80 or 90,000 working the land around it. Nothing this big had ever existed. Now, a village doesn't need paperwork. You know everybody. You know who borrowed your goat, and you know exactly where he sleeps. Uruk is not a village. It's 50,000 strangers, and grain is moving through it all day long. Into sheds, onto boats, out to the fields. And the people keeping track aren't shopkeepers. It's the temple. The biggest landlord, employer, and warehouse in the city all at once. So somebody has to prove how much left and how much actually arrived. Because if those two numbers don't match, you've just been robbed. And you'd never even know it. Their problem was never writing. Their problem was trust. You've probably walked straight past their fix in a museum. Little lumps of baked clay about the size of a game piece. Cones, balls, discs, tiny cylinders. Each shape meant one specific thing. A small cone was a small measure of grain, and a ball was a bigger measure. An egg shape meant a jar of oil. Here's the bit that's easy to miss. You didn't write down 5 sheep. You held 5 sheep right there in your hand, and you carried them around, strung on a cord or loose in a pouch, your whole warehouse in your pocket. This trick is ancient, by the way. People were pushing these little shapes around for thousands of years before anybody built a city, or a temple, or a wall. Then the city arrives and the system swells. Now you need tokens for bread, for cloth, for honey, for metal. By the end, there are about 300 shapes. And we're not just guessing what they meant. A lot of those same shapes show up again later, pressed flat into the writing itself. But the strangest part isn't the shapes, it's the counting. Because there was no number 5, not the way you mean it. They ran 13 separate counting systems at the same time. Which one you used depended on what you were counting. Barley got one system, wheat got a different one, on the same tablet. So a number wasn't a free-floating idea yet. It was glued to the thing it counted. 5 sheep and 5 jars were 2 different 5s. Okay, back to the tokens. Because there's still one ugly hole in all of this. You hand a courier a bag of tokens and a shipment, and you send him off across the desert. What stops him quietly pocketing a few? Their answer is genuinely clever. You seal the tokens inside a hollow ball of wet clay and let it bake hard. Then you take a little carved stone bead off your necklace and roll it across the wet surface. It leaves a picture that nobody else can make. That's a signature. 5,500 years ago, you still do it every time you scribble on a screen for a package. So the ball works perfectly. It's also completely useless. Because now you can't check what's inside either, not without smashing your own seal. Right before it dries, they press each token into the soft outside. One little dent for every token sitting in there. Now the outside tells you what's inside. And that's when somebody somewhere has the thought, what has this whole thing been walking toward? If the outside already tells you what's inside, why does there have to be anything inside? Throw the tokens away. You don't need them. Flatten the ball into a slab. Keep the marks, and that slab is a tablet. Those dents sharpen into wedges, and the wedges become cuneiform, the oldest writing we've ever found. Nobody sat down and invented writing. Somebody got lazy. Now, I should be straight with you. That's the best story we have, not a solved case. Specialists still argue hard about how much of it really went that way. Meanwhile, one object turns up across this whole world in numbers that make no sense. It isn't a statue or a crown. It's a bowl. Roughly 3/4 of all their pottery is this one thing. Plain, crude, pressed out of a mold, all the same size, and they turn up dumped in heaps. The leading idea is that the bowl isn't really a bowl, it's a measure. One bowl of barley is one ration, and one ration is a day of your life. So you work, you get your bowl, and a clerk presses a mark into clay. The first paper cup and the first pay slip might be the exact same object. And a good chunk of those rations came as beer, not a treat, food. Argued over too, of course. Some read the bowls as bread molds, and traces of meat have turned up in a few. 5,000 years on, we're still guessing about their Tupperware. But look at what this adds up to. Paperwork isn't the boring thing that showed up once civilization got comfortable. Paperwork is what built it. Which brings us back to that name. Kushim. The signs turn up on 18 separate tablets from Uruk, from around 3200 BC. And Kushim isn't writing about gods or war or love. Kushim is doing the books at a brewery. One of those tablets says more or less this: 28,000 measures of barley over 37 months, and then at the end, Kushim. If you had just invented writing, you might carve your name somewhere grand, so somebody would remember you. Kushim didn't do that. He signed off on a barley account, and 5,000 years later, we're still saying his name. Except here's the catch. We can't actually tell whether Kushim was a person at all. It might be a job title or the name of a whole office, which is almost better. The first name in human history might not be a man. It might just be the word for the accountant. The poems did come. Centuries later. For all that time, the most powerful invention we'd ever made just sat there quietly counting sacks of barley. And we're still not done reading it. We've pulled somewhere between 500,000 and 2 million of these tablets out of the ground. We've read maybe 30,000. There are only a few hundred people alive who can read this stuff. The rest have sat in museum drawers for 100 years. So there's probably another Kushim in a drawer in London tonight, and nobody has ever read his name.